Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Logan McReynolds. Logan is the creator of his proprietary Orgone devices called Loganite. Loganite is Orgone technology that follows strict guidelines, formula ratios, and procedures that ordinary Orgonite does not. I found Logan's knowledge and insights to be fascinating. As we discuss his Orgone creations, DMT, and his Ayahuasca experience, and the linkages to Orgone energy. And to kick the show off, my first question to Logan was, how did he get into Orgone research and technology? And here is what he had to say.
Actually, it all started with monatomic elements. I'd started ingesting monatomic elements and had tremendous results. My meditations took off, my consciousness expanded, and I really felt that this was a way to help save the planet. Like I actually started extracting my own and feeding it to plants, and I was seeing years worth of growth in these plants in only a couple of days, in a couple of weeks. It's just explosive growth. And then the same thing was happening with me when I was ingesting it internally. Life was just taking off. And I plugged into some of what Lawrence Gardner's brought to the table. He brought a lot of information about the Ark of the Covenant and how the monatomic gold was used in the pyramids, and how the pyramids were actually used to charge up the monatomic gold. So I was extracting it, and I actually wanted to bring it to the next level and try making my own arc. And so I was like, well, what do I need to do to charge this monatomic gold? And I found I needed Orgone energy. So I looked up some of the basic recipes, because people were talking back and forth, all this stuff, naysayers. Some people were making ridiculous claims. So I just made a couple. The recipe called for some metal, some crystals, and epoxy, which I had. So I made my first generator, luckily, which was a really good one. I used a lot of calcite and a lot of quartz, more than even in my first generator. I was called to use more crystal right off the bat. I put it over some body tension and totally dissolved the tension right out of my body. I started looking more into it, made some more generators, and then I started seeing the effects on the weather. And everywhere I was going, the skies would clear up above my car. I would drive across town, be totally gray, and the skies would clear up, and I was just like, holy cow. And I didn't understand why it was working, but I saw that it was working. So preliminary studies began.
How big a unit, Logan, do you need to clear the skies? I'm still experimenting, and I know I don't have it nailed down yet because I'm not clearing the skies. But how big a unit do you need in order to, let's say, break up the clouds or to break up the chemtrails?
That's kind of an interesting question, because when I first started, just couple small generators would do the trick. But over time, a lot of things have changed. People are gifting Orgone to cell phone towers, which actually affects how they work. They're gifting them to waterways. I've actually gifted some to waterways, and it actually overpowered my land generators. So there was a serious drought, and the idea is if you put the Orgone in water, it'll attract more of the water. So that's what I did. But then all of a sudden, my generators weren't clearing the skies anymore. It was just cloudy. And the other thing is, it's not necessarily about how big it is. What I found is the internal matrix. A lot of it's how small it is and how many layers of accumulation you can get within the generator. Because the basic recipes use chunks of aluminum and, pretty large pieces. But when you start working with not monatomic elements and nanometals, you start getting millions and millions more layers of accumulation. So the potency increases exponentially.
So, Logan, what is a monatomic metal exactly? It's for the audience so they have a better understanding.
Okay. Well, everything in the periodic table exists in a chemically inert state as an individual atom. They're individual atoms that are, I think they say they're in high spin state, that yet they haven't clumped together and formed the lattice structures of, as we know, the periodic elements. From my experiments and conclusions, Orgone energy is actually it's like the gaseous form before the monoatomic gold. I've actually had elements or white precipitate salts actually form on the outside of my generators after storms and stuff. So it's actually attracting so much of this prana energy, it's crystallizing on the outside.
Wow. Okay.
That's something you can look into. If the listeners want to look into it, definitely look into David Wolf brings up some good stuff about monoatomic gold. Lawrence Gardner brings up some really good stuff about monoatomic gold, and it itself is a whole interesting study because these two are so directly connected.
Okay, so you said that you were able to clear the sky. That the device does not have to be large. So
No.
It sounds like it has more to do with how it's constructed and what you're putting into it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because technically, even a building in a city is an orgone accumulator because it's layers of conductors and insulators. You got the steel, you got the concrete, you got carpets and rugs. So eventually that creates all these layers, but doesn't have the crystal to that piezoelectric throw over to help transmute it to the positive spectrum. And that's why cities actually feel different because they're actually kind of attracting a lot of the heavier DOR energy. Plants are orgone accumulators. Trees are layers of conductors, insulators, and piezoelectric semiconductors. Wood is actually piezoelectric, and of course you have the water. And they create oxygen. So yeah, they're natural generators.
Now, I've also read too, in some of the research that I have done, I have heard about putting it in water, making sure that it's on the ground. So in your work, do you find that to be true? If it's in water or sitting on the ground, it's more effective?
Yeah, I went on a crystal skull pilgrimage and actually made an Orgone crystal skull that I had made. And I drove through New York City and I had it on the dashboard and it was clearing all the energy. It was actually clearing the sky, clearing the brown cloud. But there was at a point where I took it off the dashboard, and as soon as I picked it up, and this is earlier formulas that I had made that are closer to what you find on the internet with I had titanium and I even had aluminum and stuff in there. But anyway, I picked it off the dashboard, and I instantly got a zap, and I got a headache in the back of my brain. And then when I got back to the hotel, I put the crystal skull under the water, and I put it in the bathtub, turned the water on. As soon as I turned the water on, it was like the whole energy of the room had flushed out, and my headache, it was like my headache shot out through the drain.
Interesting.
It almost like discharged the energy like as quickly as I would say like static electricity or something like that. So it almost, it can accumulate kind of like especially if they don't have enough crystal, they can accumulate sort of like a vacuum bag, and they really need to be emptied and clear out.
So is that something you have to do on a regular basis with any orgone device?
Not any, because and that's something that I've been working on is like my generators, I have equal parts surface area because I use these really tiny metals. I also really use really tiny crystals, and I use 3 different kinds. I use quartz, amethyst, and tourmaline. So there's 3 different types of piezoelectric pressure going on to convert all that energy. So it's not as essential to because it doesn't accumulate as much DOR, it's not attracting as much DOR, so there's less to cleanse, there's less to transmute. And that's the thing, it's still a question for me. I'm not sure if it's really a generator or if it's an accumulator where the crystals are helping attract more of itself, or if the crystals are actually help transmuting it. So it's still, I still have some questions in the science, and I think that's really important too, keeping this really open-ended because it's so elusive.
So when we talk about orgone, some folks are probably asking themselves at this point, what are these guys talking about? How do you describe what it is?
I would say orgone energy is the primordial foundation of reality. It is the source emanation before anything comes into existence. It's like the etheric gaseous building block. Chinese call it qi. It's called prana. Orgone energy is a word. So there's all kinds of different words for this same energy. I even think scalar and some of these other things are really pointing at the same realm of energy and technology. Because actually, I think it's a whole dimensional thing too. It's actually a whole parallel dimension that kind of intersects with space, time, and electromagnetics. Orgone's right at that pivotal point.
I have to be honest, even the units I have made, I have noticed a significant difference in the environment in my room here with the computers, the Wi-Fi, the cell, and everything else. Whereas I used to sit in this room and I would get maybe that anxious feeling or that very fatigued feeling, maybe even feeling a little out of sorts.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're just swimming in that EMF.
Yeah. 60 hertz. And the Schumann resonance at 7.83 hertz is a totally different consciousness than 60 hertz. The 60 hertz that's buzzing through us actually depletes melatonin, which is our number one anti-cancer agent, and it's cutting us off from the earth frequencies. And if you, I think when Zen Buddhists or Buddhists, they go into their chants, they're actually going all the way down to a 4 hertz. So the whole meditative state's actually more slowing down, and which is actually speeding up the consciousness. But we're just raising up, and we're just at the 60 hertz, and we really need to get grounded back to the earth. And that's also important. So, we ourselves as orgone accumulators, because even the human body is one, we need to get grounded. We need to be in contact with the earth. We need to be discharging this energy that's building up, kind of just like the generators that don't have enough crystal.
It does feel good to be around. It does. And what I've done is I've made orgone devices, and I've given them out to family and friends, and I've asked them to come back to me and just give me the truth. Just tell me, do you sense a difference? Do you feel different? And everybody has gotten back to me and said that they definitely have felt a difference. The biggest difference being that people who are working in front of computers, sitting in a room with a router, they do not have that feeling, that anxious feeling, or just feeling uncomfortable after a while. They don't have that. Others have come back to me and said that by putting the devices in their bedroom on each nightstand, if you will, they're actually sleeping much better, whereas they had very broken and choppy sleep before. They're now coming back to me and saying they're sleeping right through the night.
Yeah.
I think you're probably finding the same things, and probably a lot more than me, because I'm a neophyte at it.
Yeah, I mean, some of the findings have been astounding. All right, I'll tell you a little story. Okay, so in 2011, I went on a crystal skull pilgrimage, and I had made my first generators. I sold them in New York City and did a talk on orgone. About a year and a half later, I was at Alex Gray's Cosm. I did a talk. I held one of my crystal skulls up, and I said, I'm going to clear 7% of the world's water with orgone energy, because they said, make a proclamation. So that's what I proclaimed. And then this guy Pedro comes up to me. He points at a generator. And he's like, no way, man. No way. I had been using this, chanting, and I wanted to meet the maker of this device, because he wanted to learn more about it, because he bought it for me. We didn't have any contact information. So he just kept me in his intentions while he was chanting. And there I was. I appeared. At that time, he was documenting police brutality at Occupy Wall Street. He was going down and taking photographs of cops beating people up. He would get his camera smashed in, and it was quite violent. So it's like, yo, take one of my generators, bring it with you. Just try it. And he ended up going, and that day it was literally kumbaya, drums, and guitar playing. And the cops everyone was just hanging out. So he's like, okay, this totally changes my life perspective, because now I'm not going to be documenting police brutality. Now I'm into the orgone energy stuff. So he ended up giving that up and really shifting his whole direction. And there was other things like that he had done with the energy too. There was a certain area in New York City, more brutality going on, where there's a certain neighborhood. These kids were just getting beat up and actually getting murdered by cops. And so there was a protest that was going on for 3 years straight. And he sent me a picture of the police station and the protest. And I noticed that right by the police station, there was a cell phone tower. So it's like, no way. So he ended up he took a dodecahedron, kind of like this one. Well, it was actually earlier technology. And he put it right by the cell phone tower. That same day, 3 cops crossed the street and actually joined the protest. So totally shifted the energy between the two, us and them sort of thing that was going on.
Yeah, the thing is, too, with the cell phone towers, these things are popping up left and right. I live down in North Carolina, and you're up north, right?
Yeah, right now I'm near Rochester.
Rochester, okay. And these things are maybe every quarter to half a mile away. And so,
close to inner city, they're every 100 yards in a city almost.
man, I'll tell you, and I see them, the one that really knocked me out was there was one like right next to a hospital. And I thought to myself, you've got to be kidding me.
In water towers. They're on water towers everywhere.
Yeah.
They're next to police stations, water towers, hospitals, the place where we don't need them the most.
Exactly. And the police run around, they have their little radios attached right to their shoulder. So they're being bombarded all the time.
Well, they're actually wearing, with their layers of carbon and Kevlar and their firearm and the stuff you just brought up, that's actually creating an Orgone accumulator that doesn't have any crystals. So it's actually concentrating the death force of the city. And from my own experiments, because when I started working with smaller metals, it would increase its potency. And I found when I had generators that accumulated DOR, it would activate the back part of the brain, which would be aggression, fight, flight, lack of compassion, paranoia, fear, dehydration. Those are all symptoms of DOR poisoning. And that ego trip is all part of that, because it's totally the wrong part of the brain.
So, Logan, how do you make it? Could you give us a little tutorial on, I know it's going to be tough to do because this is going to wind up being on YouTube, but could you explain a little bit about how do you go about making it?
When I first started, and some people might be upset at me about this, whatever. When I first started, I was telling everyone needs to make this. This is the way to save the planet. Well, unfortunately, this technology is so powerful and the matrix is so tricky. If it's off a little bit, it can cause some serious disruptions. I mean, for example, within the first couple months of when I started making Orgone, I got some 14 karat gold, thinking, okay, 14 karat gold should be really good. It was a fine powder. So I mixed a lot of this fine powder into this resin with, I wanted it to be powerful, but I also was intending for it to be powerfully healing, so that intention was there. And I made it in a test tube. After it was made, I ended up getting this really intense headache, but it was like the Orgone was tricking me. It was almost lying to me, telling me that it was helping my headache, even though I could feel it tingling my arm and going right to my headache, creating it. It was like, oh, it's helping. I was like, I thought it was helping. I ended up giving it to my dog. And within that week, my car broke down. My ex-girlfriend's ex-boyfriend was threatening to murder us. I ended up getting kicked out of my house. And then my dog got prescribed a medicine that ended up killing her. So, and my dad at the time said, you absolutely are not allowed to make this stuff in my house. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have a leader. You're wandering in the dark with this stuff. So anyway, I ended up taking that generator and remaking it. So he told me I cannot make Orgone ever again in the house. I deliberately disobeyed his command and I made a crystal skull. I took a pyramid or a mold and I completely filled it up with quartz, but only put a tiny, tiny bit of this 14 karat gold powder. And I showed my dad, right after breaking his rules, and he goes, "Wow, Log, that's really cool. I think you could really go somewhere with that. I think I'm getting really good energy from this." So the result of the energy totally changed the whole reaction of my father. So, and the other thing is I've had to learn this over and over again, that the crystal is so important, because I thought it was good to go because it was gold, but in the long run it ended up causing a lot of problems.
So you say the crystals are important. So what kind of crystals? Is it just quartz crystals that you use, or other crystals also?
Well, I use a lot of fine tourmaline powder throughout the matrix, and amethyst, because amethyst creates far infrared rays. But I actually don't advise people to make it unless they can really dedicate their lives to it, dedicate a serious study to it, because the consequences of making bad generators are not good. I've burned off a lot of generators, even if they're beautiful like this, I make it and then all of a sudden, somebody gets sick or something. And I'd get cocky and I'd be like, well, I've been making it for a lot of years. I don't need to measure out my nanometals. And then all of a sudden, all this terrible stuff happens. Well, okay, yes, I did. I need to stick to these really strict formulas. And that's part of the reason I'm not going to just give them away to anyone, is because I already have. I've given them to people and said, this is keep it like this. And then they take it and then they change it. And then they have their cars breaking down, their cat dies, their girlfriend breaks up with them, but they don't believe in DOR, and I'm stuck in 3D. So, you know what I mean? So it's a tricky thing.
Well, so without giving away your trade secrets, if you will, because I completely understand what you're saying. I get it. You know, look, you've spent a lot of time developing this, and you're telling the audience, like, this is a science. This is not something you just slap together and have.
It's not something to play with. It's serious. I mean, it's affecting reality on the base foundation, and it can be subtle, but it is so powerful because everything's stacked on it. I mean, when I make it, I mean, this might sound funny, but when I make it, I really feel like I'm traveling to another dimension. I'm actually traveling to a parallel Earth, because everything that's around, because it has such an attractive force, because it has its own laws of attraction, that ends up overpowering a lot of the laws that have already been in my life. So it's almost like all of a sudden this new stuff starts pouring in, and it's a whole new world. And that's what happens to customers too. They get a generator and it starts attracting all these new levels of frequencies and stuff.
Okay, so let's approach it this way. The traditional way to make Orgone, if you go on the web and you read those web pages, is any metal will do. Aluminum is, cheap. It's and because of that, it is probably the most used metal when you make Orgone. And your position is aluminum is not a good thing to be using.
Neither is brass. And this is something that was a painful thing for me to learn too. I started using a nano brass, and man, I was just not having good results. Business wasn't good. It was weird. It was like all my friends evaporated out of my life. And then my dad goes, "Logan, have you looked into brass?" And I was like, he's like, just look on Wikipedia what it comes from. And then I found out they actually dispose of radioactive materials in brass. And what Wilhelm Reich found is if you put radioactive materials in Orgone, it amplifies the radioactivity exponentially. So people could potentially be creating radioactive Orgone devices that are really bad, utilizing brass. And then with the aluminum, it couples with the chemtrails. So those aren't really good either. And, there's going to be people that are going to want to argue the point, and that's fine too. Like I want debate's good. It's good to, because we really got to figure this stuff out. What I found is gold, just 24 karat gold, monatomic elements, monatomic gold, for me has been the best manifester. It's been the best conductor, and it's one that's definitely shown the abundance the most. It's like those properties are really showing.
Now, the metal in the process, what is it doing? Is it smoothing out the field? What does the metal do in the process?
So the original accumulators were layers of steel wool and fiberglass. So the metals are an attractive force. They're conductors. They cosmically conduct this Orgone energy. So as it's being attracted, then the insulator is like the well. It actually holds it. So it ends up becoming a sort of cosmic capacitor in a way. And then with the crystal, it's almost like more like a cosmic transistor or something, because it has that third part that helps switch it over.
Now, most people use quartz crystals, and that's it.
Well, what I do is my molds are completely filled with quartz. So what I'll do is, at the nano level, I have this really fine tourmaline, that's why it's all black. And then on the larger level, this is rose quartz. So this will have rose quartz, and then through it'll have amethyst. And so there's actually a very, very tiny crystals, and then I have very, very large crystals. So I have crystals on both scale spectrums, both on the very small and the very large, with multiple varieties too.
I see that what you just showed me there, it's not encapsulated in anything. It's not sitting in a bowl or a glass, just standalone by itself. So the question I have for you is, you see mine here, and it's in a glass. Now, is it being in a glass a problem, or is it okay?
It's fine. You're not going to be able to connect with it as directly, The best is actually when you can just, when there's crystals exposed. When the crystals are exposed and you can put your hands right on the crystal is where the most positive Orgone energy is going to be emanated.
Okay, so on mine, you see here the crystal is sticking out. Is that good?
Yeah, that's where you're going to get the most energy coming out of it.
Gotcha. Okay, so when the crystals are completely submerged, then that is not the optimum.
It's a little bit. It's more insulated from being able to contact it. Like even this one's mostly encapsulated in the resin, but then there's a couple spots that are exposed and actually can touch the crystals, and that's where I get a buzz. I can just hear on it, and it's like it lights up my whole crown.
Okay, excellent. All right. So I'm learning something here. And now the type of resin, Logan, do you use just hobby resin that you would get at Michael's or the Bondo that you would maybe get at the Home Depot?
I use an industrial, I'm not going to expose all my sources, but I use an industrial polyester. And I had switched, and actually I got to update some of my information on my website, but I had been using an all-natural resin, which was great for me working with it. I loved working with it. Making the art was really nice, but it didn't shrink enough. So it wasn't giving me enough piezoelectric throwover. And it was funny. As soon as I switched my recipe back to polyester, getting off the all-natural resin, all of a sudden I was doing these house parties and selling my Orgone at spas, so things like really took off, so it was really speaking for itself and what was manifesting in my own life. And I think that's one of the biggest indicators is if you are a builder, be extraordinarily sensitive to everything that's going on around you. If people are getting sick, if things are getting better, every aspect has to be noted, so.
Now you mentioned the resin and it didn't shrink enough. So
Yeah.
the audience understands what we're talking about. It's that contraction. The resin is contracting, and it's the metals and the crystals. Everything is compressed. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Well, like I've been talking about piezoelectric semiconductors, they're piezoelectric crystals, and what that actually is crystals that when they're under pressure, under vibration, or under frequency, they create electricity. So what's happening is the resin's shrinking 9%. So there's actually there's that much pressure being exuded onto the crystals, so there's that much more piezoelectric potential coming out. So then any electromagnetic frequency coming in and bouncing off of it or being absorbed is actually stimulating the crystal. I've done a couple experiments where I've made free energy batteries out of this technology to prove that this piezoelectric activation was actually happening. And there's one on my Facebook, and I don't know if it's on my YouTube, but I made a little zinc and copper nail, and it created a little bit of current and voltage, even after being shorted out all night. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Let me ask you a question, Logan. Have you ever been hassled for doing this work?
Um,
I know why I asked that, because I've heard stories that people who are engaged in making Orgone devices and have built excellent devices have been hassled because of what Orgone can bring to the table. We just talked about the benefits from clearing the sky and clearing up the environment and so on.
There's a lot of money in the chemtrail industry. Let's put it that way. And those same people are watching, basically. That's as far as I want to get into it, because I try to play dumb. But, helicopters, spy planes, stuff that would make me sound schizophrenic or a little paranoid to the people around me. Right. They're just like, it's just a plane. I'm like, yeah, that's the same plane that's been around me all day. And I think also there is also genuine curiosity going on too. What's going on with this? Because I think that there are sophisticated tools that the government has to read our energy. I've heard stories about Google taking an analytical study of everybody's energy body or whatever. I don't know how true that is, but I'm pretty sure they have some pretty sophisticated equipment.
Yeah.
This kind of energy.
Well, what I tell people is whatever technology that the government is showing you, and that includes the military-industrial complex, they're showing you the nonsense. They're at least 50 years ahead, and in some cases you'll read and do your research that some of the technology, depending upon the type of technology, is 1,000 years ahead of what they're showing us.
A lot of that sort of technology would just seem alien. It would seem otherworldly.
Right. So now when you build the devices, and because this one's really got me because I have not been successful at this. I openly admit I have not been able to do cloud busting or chemtrail busting, that type of thing there. I did put 2 devices outside. I do sense that the yard has a nice feel to it, but it's not clearing anything. So you mentioned earlier about success in doing that. What is the trick to getting that to work so that you can clear the sky out? If you can talk about it. If you're not comfortable talking about it, just say, Mike, not talking about it.
Well, like I said, several years ago, it was a different task. I think the technology above has changed, and so our technology below has to change as well. We have to catch up. And, well, I guess some of the things you can work on is having a grounded. There's no handbook right now. You know, Wilhelm Reich he was starting to write handbooks on how to operate cloudbusters. But actually, he said, he had a whole bunch of protocols too about the using cloudbusters because it actually is manipulating the jet stream, and that's something that builders need to know too. Is if they're building Orgone, they should be watching the weather. They should be watching the jet stream because the jet stream is being affected by their work, even if they don't know it or they're taking note. They could be building something in New York while there's tornadoes in Texas because it's all connected.
Well, let me ask you this question. Some of these devices to do the cloud busting, they say that you'd have the copper poles in the bucket and all that stuff. Are the copper poles necessary, or is that just somebody's idea of what they believe would work because it looks like it should work?
It's not necessary per se because when I first started getting into nano metals, all I needed was a generator this big. It's pocket sized to clear the clouds. And what I would do is I would put it on like a fire hydrant or something like that, and then all of a sudden it would be like skies would be clear above me. But over time, that same piece didn't have the same punch. As far as the copper tubes, they're metal generally, so they're the conductive force. They can actually, and this is what Wilhelm Reich did, use copper tubes, and they would draw the OR out of the air. So there is something to that. I have done some experiments with copper tubes, making little chem busters or cloud busters. I don't do that a lot because I've seen that it has an effect on the jet stream that's beyond my understanding.
Okay. Now, Logan, the metals that you use, you mentioned nanometals, 24 karat gold. This doesn't sound like it's cheap. It sounds like you're investing some money into making your devices, which would maybe turn some people's world upside down that are used to making it with very cheap products, but you're not doing that.
The better materials, the better Orgone. It's like any kind of factory. The better materials you put into the factory, the better the product coming out. And the same is with the energy. But then again, just because you have good materials, like I found out early on, just because I had 14 karat gold powder, and maybe it would have been different with 24 karat gold, I actually assumed that would actually be worse because the conductive force would be even stronger. To me, the most important thing is the base formula. It's a triad. It's a balanced triangle of conductors, insulators, and piezoelectric semiconductors. And I go into this a little bit on my website because I talk about even the foundation of reality is made out of triads. We have protons, electrons, and neutrons. So that's actually mimicking the same balance that's going on within the generators. So that's kind of where I started keying onto this, because I was assuming with the cloud clearing that it was somehow coupling with the ionosphere.
Do you have a background in the sciences, or is this just you doing research and trial and error?
Trial and error and research. I mean, this is the sort of stuff where I'll be like, okay, the ionosphere, what's the ionosphere? And then I would start studying the ionosphere, and then I would be looking at YouTube, MIT courses, and taking their their free physics on there and stuff, and just getting as much information as I could to try to fill in this information, because there's no course or something that'll fill in the data that you really need for all this, with monatomic gold and how all this stuff works. It's not necessarily directly intuitive to our normal way of thinking.
Now, Logan, I don't know if you want to comment on this, but we touched on it earlier in the discussion when we talked about Wi-Fi, EMF, your laptops, your cell phones. How do those frequencies affect humans?
Well, one of them, like I mentioned, is actually raising the frequency that our brain's operating at. It's raising it from a more natural state of like 7 all the way up to 60. So it's pushing all this. And actually, since our brains, we are electromagnetic beings. Everything in existence is electromagnetics. So when we are surrounded by electromagnetics, it's actually going into our brain, and it affects our brain waves, which is affecting our thought, affecting our clairvoyance, affecting our psychic powers, and all these things. So we ended up, it almost becomes like an electromagnetic prison. We're totally squared off. We're in squares, because the natural order is the Fibonacci, the spiral, the vortex. And all of a sudden we're putting ourselves in boxes that are surrounded by electromagnetics. And I think it's really cutting us off on multiple levels, not just melatonin, but also these higher realms of spiritual possibilities.
Now, this cutting off that you're speaking of, is this something that you believe is intentional, or is this just the result of technology and people that develop and deploy the technology not being aware of its effect on humanity?
Well, I think there's a bit of both. I think there's some lack of consciousness where we're just, okay, there isn't bugs inside, so I'm going to be inside. Okay, now I have a light switch, so now I'm more comfortable. So chasing these creature comforts, it's actually cutting us off from another level. But on the same flip of the coin, I mean, it's clear that the government, especially, the U.S. government's always been interested in mind control. I mean, and that some of these things have been publicized even. And so that's not anything new. And the fact that our brains would be susceptible to these electromagnetics, yeah. I mean, I think it's totally possible that these are being used dubiously to manipulate.
I have a good friend of mine. He sent me an email, and he had received some information, I think it was out of Germany, and he had mentioned to me that the chemtrails, the actual intent of the chemtrails, or one of the major intents, I should say, of the chemtrails, is to disrupt the Schumann resonance.
That would make a lot of sense. And it's what I've been finding, it's cutting off the Orgone energy too. When there's a thick cloud of this aluminum, this DOR, it's actually cutting off the sun's energy from coming into us. And that's one of the main cosmic sources of energy. Trees need it for growth and everything else. But it's like Bill Gates is actually funding this. They call it cloud seeding because they're trying to help global warming. Obviously there's other climate change and other things going on. But I actually think Bill Gates is really just trying to help humanity with the money he's got. But he might be being manipulated by other people, and no one really has the full story. And I feel like if these same beings, if Bill Gates knew how powerful this thing was in my hand, he'd be funding me instead of poisoning us all. Like I really don't think that he's operating from a place of malice, but he truly wants to help, and he just doesn't know how, unfortunately.
People are ripping into him, especially with his vaccine program, which is not a good thing in my view. He keeps talking about that, and more people are getting on board with why it is that you should not be vaccinated because of what's in vaccines, So, but I completely understand what you're saying. I mean, let's just put it this way, if they really cared about an agenda which serves humanity, then they would be investing in your work.
Right. Well, it hasn't been validated. It hasn't been seen. A lot of it's been demonized, and most of it, you get to a point where it starts accumulating the DOR, and then that's where the individual gets cut off. Like Wilhelm Reich, he was doing some amazing stuff, but then he threw some uranium inside of his Orgone accumulator, and then he ended up in prison, dying in prison 6 months later. That was the result of the foundational shift in reality that he had made. It was like kind of like a cosmic karma came and kicked his butt.
Now, the pyramids in Giza, as an example, a lot of researchers will say that the pyramids were energy devices. Do you know anything about that, or is that something that...
I have theories, because obviously I can't prove anything, but I actually think they, in a nutshell, I think they were cosmic Orgone accumulators that were accumulating so much Orgone that it was precipitating the monoatomic gold, and then they were actually taking this monoatomic gold and then shooting it through shafts to their home planet. So I actually think they were taking the life force, the life gold off of our planet and beaming it to their home planet. So their own stratosphere, their own plants, their own prana and law of attraction would be increased. That's my theory.
Fair enough. I mean, there's a lot of theories about what was really going on. They clearly were not tombs.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That we know. That's the mainstream take on what the pyramids are. But those that have dug into it and have done the research realize that the pyramids are something far, far more important than what they try to downplay them to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Is there anything else, Logan, that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, the other thing I would talk about, which I think is a really fascinating and very unique thing about what I'm doing, is I've actually started including Acacia Confucia in my generators. And the reason I'm doing that is the Ark of the Covenant was actually made out of Acacia Confucia, and it happens to be extraordinarily high in dimethyltryptamine, which I'm sure a lot of people know. There's theorized that it's produced in our pineal gland. So it's my thinking that the reason why there was so much DMT in the Ark of the Covenant, it was actually to couple with the pineal gland so that the person ingesting the gold could psychically connect with the Ark and then manifest directly from that. So there's actually, my generators actually, I really feel have an extra psychic link with the user because of this extra acacia wood.
Now, what exactly is Acacia Confucia? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Acacia Confucia is a tree. It grows in Thailand and Hawaii, and it happens to have a lot of dimethyltryptamine in it. And the Ark was made with it, so I think that's just a huge key component.
So you're saying by including the Acacia Confucia in the construct of the device, this is increasing the activity with the pineal gland?
Yes, I think it's helping link the generator with the pineal gland, and also I think it helps decalcify it too, because there's the generators that make it really strong. Like they actually have a sort of like effect, it's almost like not like you get high, but it has a certain clearing and clairvoyance and effect like that. So I think it is activating the pineal gland.
Interesting. So have you had any experiences yourself, Logan, where you believe your devices have opened up your pineal gland?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was on the Crystal Skull pilgrimage, and the Crystal Skull I made actually had ayahuasca ingredients in it. It had both parts of the ayahuasca. And I had this, the plasma ball things? They have like the electricity going through them. They're kind of like Tesla coils.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was like basically Tesla coiling the skull and like zapping it, and then you could see the electricity shooting through the quartz and all this stuff, and the energy is like whoa, 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 just like radiating off of it. You're like, okay, that's neat. I flip on the lights, and all of a sudden I was like slammed with this energy, and I went and like opened the doorway. Everything was extraordinarily bright, and then there's geometric patterns like going everywhere, as if I was in an ayahuasca journey. And I was with my buddy, and we're like, oh my God, what did we do to ourselves? Like, are we going to come down? Like, did we break ourselves? And then we ended up going for a swim, and then the water, as soon as we hit the water, that energy discharged, and we came back to this reality. But it was actually kind of a frightening and very powerful experience.
I tell people that these experiences, we're very, very capable of these experiences. And it's interesting, when we talk about ayahuasca, many that have taken ayahuasca have told the same type of experience. And it's interesting. It's an extraordinary experience, exactly what you had. But on the other hand, they will also report back that, I guess at least initially, it was a little scary because all of a sudden you're someplace that you have never ever experienced in your entire life, never dreamt you would experience, and there you are.
Another dimension. And I think really, and I feel, because I have been working with an ayahuasca shaman, and I think that's been something that's actually been really helping my sensitivity to this work, because I think it's like this energy is actually really affecting that whole dimension that we're able to tap into with those medicines. And even I actually paid for ceremony with a pyramid. And the shaman actually really loved it, and he said it was clearing the medicine and clearing the people and deepening the experience. So everyone was able to have an even more profound cleansing, because it's clearing that etheric realm. It's clearing those negative spirits. It's clearing all that heavy karmic stuff that you end up inevitably facing in those deep journeys.
Did you say that you experienced an ayahuasca ceremony?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, did you have it here, or did you have to go abroad, South America, to have that experience?
I was here. I did it near in the Catskills, and then I actually had one in Brooklyn, which was really intense.
In Brooklyn, okay, of all places.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was living out in the forest at the time, so I was like, well, I'm going to the city for this, but it was the medicine I needed because I fell in love with humanity in a different way. Like I cleansed certain city phobias, I guess.
Now, I know this is an Orgone discussion, but I'm fascinated.
Yeah, tangent.
That's okay. I'm fascinated. Your ayahuasca experience, what was it like?
Well, it's not necessarily an easy question to answer, but I can share some visions or some things that came to me. For example, there was one point in the journey where it got really deep. There was a woman in the group that was, everything she did just bothered me. It just like pissed me off, just, oh. And I was like, and I just like was laying there and I was like, why is she bothering me? Like I'm supposed to be here out of like love and light and all this stuff. And then I'm like realizing like, oh, she's my sister. And then then it was weird. Then all of a sudden the medicine washed in and I actually saw all these memories with my actual sister. And it was actually in these geometric forms. And then the medicine came through and like rearranged these whole like constructs of belief. Like I can't even really describe it, but it rearranged things. It rearranged past events and how I understood them. And I was able to forgive my sister for certain things. And then all of a sudden, like, I saw this other person in a totally different way, and then I was like, oh, you're my sister. So there was a big shift. And then there was a point where I was laying down and I was like, I was in my pineal gland and it was like every aspect of my being was rotating around me like in a Rubik's Cube almost or something. Pretty wild.
Interesting. So did you find that the shift afterwards, the experience resulted in a shift that was very powerful for you, something that was a game changer, or was it just a moment in time and then things went back to the way things were?
It actually had a very profound and deeply shifting effect versus I've had other psychedelic experiences and a lot of them would be temporary. The lesson would be then, and then if you didn't make the change, then it wasn't happening. With this, it went way deeper, and we're like, a couple weeks later, all my fingernails are really long, and I'm like, oh my God, I guess I used to chew my fingernails. But what happened is the medicine had gone in and actually cleansed deep traumas and cleansed these anxieties. So I wasn't chewing my nails at stoplights, because I guess I used to chew them at stoplights all the time. All of a sudden I stopped because I wasn't anxious anymore. So that's just a little example of what shifted. And also the us and them. I used to think about them all the time, and then I just realized, oh, we're all here.
Yeah.
We're all living creatures in the same cosmos.
There's one.
Yeah. So that was a beautiful thing for me too. So I think those sort of medicines are really crucial for this shift, for this energy, for us to awaken to some of these aspects of ourselves too. I think in a lot of ways they can be like vitamins or minerals that are essential for our development, but we're not getting them.
Now, this is very interesting, Logan. I'm glad we got onto this particular discussion. Now, I have never had an ayahuasca experience. I just know about it from my research and my reading. But what I have read is that when you ingest it, when you take it in, it doesn't taste very good. Did you find that it wasn't very tasteful?
Well, if you think about it in such a ordinary sense, to me, I had the Amazon in my mouth. I had the jungle in my mouth. I had the awakening in my mouth. I had, I can't even put into words what I had in my mouth. It was so much more than, oh, this is gross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was something that I knew was going to change my spirit, So I guess I took it with a lot of reverence and respect. And maybe that's why I had such a great response, is because I expected a great response, and I also treat it with a lot of respect. Because I had the ingredients for a long time, I was tempted to make it myself, but I was just called to do it in ceremony with a leader, with a shaman. And I'm glad I did it because they brought a structure that was really important. It's like boarding a spaceship. You can have the nuclear reactor or whatever it is for a UFO, but doesn't mean you're going to be able to drive it to where you need to go.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. So now, were there people that were at the ceremony that did not have a good experience with it?
Some of the whole process of the journey isn't necessarily fun. It's work. It can be real spiritual work, but like I know there was one woman who was late. I don't know if I should talk about her personal experience, but she was having a hard time all night. But by the morning, by the sunrise, she was like a new being. Like she had been cleansed and she'd been been washed. So on one level, it was painful, but on the other level, it was an essential healing that needs to happen. It's kind of like when you hurt yourself, there's pain involved, but that pain is also part of that healing process.
Right.
So that's kind of how I see it,
Yeah, very interesting. It's something that is on my bucket list to do, to experience an ayahuasca ceremony. So maybe I'll connect with you after the call.
Bring some good Orgone with you. It can become one of your best friends on the journey. I was always clinging to mine.
Well, I'm going to go to your site and I'm going to get myself some good Orgone. Well, Logan, I think we're pushing up against the hour here, and this has been very fascinating. It really has been. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I guess I could briefly mention that the other thing is that so you have this base triad matrix. That base triad matrix, inevitably, it ends up amplifying all of the metaphysical properties of anything else inside. So I have, the different stones that are inside, or the different plants that I have, their energies are actually amplified. So it's like I have white sage, for example, I have white sage in all my generators because it is then amplified through the atmosphere wherever they are.
It sounds like you really know what you're doing, and you put a lot of work and effort into it. There's a lot of research into your Orgone devices. And like I said, I am nowhere near where you are, and I can say I've noticed a significant difference, as I said, in this room here that I'm in, that I'm speaking to you from, with all the Wi-Fi, the router, the cell phone, and everything else, whereas I used to sit here, and as I mentioned, you get that anxious feeling, maybe headaches, whatever, you might feel out of sorts. I don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. So it certainly works. Well, Logan, I think that about wraps it up, unless you have something else you want to add.
Cool. We'll have to have another radio talk.
Yeah, we will. Whenever you want. Seriously, whenever you want to come back, man, you just let me know.
All right, man. Thank you so much for doing the interview.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Anytime you want to come back.
All right.
All right?
Awesome.
All right, Logan.
Yeah, take care.
And that concludes my interview with Logan McReynolds, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Logan's website can be found at www.orgonemachine.com. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, The Sage of Quay. Also, you can take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.